Welcome to Hermit Woods, where there's a story in every bottle.
Hello, world.
Welcome, Clark. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure. I admire you guys so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well,
You really
likewise,
are the craziest
sure.
people in the industry.
Next to you. Next to you.
Well, I'm giving you a run for your money. That's for sure.
So let me just for all of our guests out there who are joining us today, I just want to take a moment to introduce Clark and tell you a little background. First of all, Clark's been in the wine business since 1972. After dropping out of MIT, he took a job in California at a wine shop, which is where I presume he began his career, which I'm sure he will tell us more about. And then he went on to get his BS and MS with UC Davis. And in the 90s, he built a company called RH Phillips. And soon
80s.
after, what's that? In the 80s? Oh, thank you, Clark. And soon after that, he founded Vinovation in 1992. And since then, he's provided high-tech services and consulting services to thousands of wineries all over the world. He's spent 24 years teaching class at UC Davis. And in 2011, he published Postmodern Winemaking, which is how sort of Clark comes into our life. There it is.
That's the book.
There.
Yeah, that's the one. That's how we got connected.
Yeah. So
great book.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about all of this in a second. But before I do that, so Ken actually came across Postmodern Winemaking and was intrigued, and he read the book, and that's what prompted him to make a connection with you, Clark, which then led to us attending an event that you put on in New York City, I believe around 2012. It was around launching of your book. And shortly thereafter, we attended another event in Manhattan where you were the one of the panelists on a discussion that was being put on by being moderated by Ray Isle, the editor of Food and Wine magazine. And we had a great afternoon with you for that conversation or the panel. And then
you had a great afternoon. What actually happened is that Ken's blueberry wine completely stole the show. We had 30 or 40 great wines there. And all anybody wanted to talk about was how great this blueberry wine was.
Well, thank you.
So,
I don't know if you.
I've never really forgiven you for that, Ken. Yeah.
I don't know if you know, Clark, but because of that, our blueberry wine being at that event, it was only about 4 months later that Ray Isle called us up and said, "Do you guys still have that blueberry wine that you shared at that event we were at together? Do you mind if I share it with Kathy Lee and Hoda on the Today Show?" So,
oh my God.
Yeah, so that because
you of course said by no means.
Yes, of course. And you can actually, I think the video still is on our website of the actual presentation to Kathy Lee and Hoda. But since then, we've gotten to know you quite well, and we've had some other opportunities to visit with you. And I wanted to take a moment before we go into our interview to share a more recent time we spent with you. The three of us went out to California a few years ago, and we visited, and you actually played host to introducing us to California wine country and several really important people in the wine industry who you thought we would benefit from getting to know. So I wanted to share.
Yeah, I talked you into driving about 1,000 miles.
I think
it was a lot of driving.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen here, and we can chat while I'm doing so. But I'll just go over what these are, Clark. Our first
that's the
day
Georgia
in the city.
Yeah, that's the Georgian wines.
Right, at the San Francisco Wine School.
Yeah, that was a really cool experience. We tasted wines from all over the Georgia region in Eastern Europe, and we tasted some really interesting stuff. That was a great way to get introduced to our week in California. So thank you for that. And then there's a couple pictures from that. But then probably one of the highlights of our trip with you is you hooked us up with Randall Graham, along with a couple other winemakers, winemaker friend of yours, friends of yours, and we had lunch together, and I think we imbibed on about 30 different wines from all of the participating members of the gathering there. And that's one of our pictures from this really cool Mexican restaurant that we all attended with Randall. And that's Randall, if you didn't know, off in the back there. Clark, could you tell us who the other two folks
Yeah,
are?
that guy on the left is my longtime partner. We founded Vinovation together, and his name is Rick Jones.
Oh, yes.
Okay, yes, I remember.
Very important wine technology guy that works for Della Tofla now.
And this gentleman here?
He was an A+ student in my 1996 class, and also asked a whole lot of annoying questions all the way through the thing. And then he and his wife started a winery down around Monterey called Bunter Spring, and he's been experimenting with sulfite-free Syrahs and stuff like that. The guy's really a genius, and we're extremely fond of one another. And I was really pleased that he could make it in here and share his perspective.
That was such a great connection with him, because he came out not long after to New Hampshire and visit us at the winery.
Did he really?
Yeah,
oh, that's great.
He wanted to come out, and we got a chance to talk shop and taste some stuff out of barrels, and he went home with a bunch of wine. He was just a wonderful guy.
So this is after we had lunch with Randall, we went out to his Populacham vineyard, and we got to hang out in the vineyard for a half an hour or so and see some of the fun things that he's doing there. This jumps around a little bit. This back at the restaurant. But he along with his vineyard, he had a great garden. He kind of imbibed on some of it, or enjoyed some of his the fruits of his labor there. And his
some strawberries.
And we got a tour of your house. That's your house in Santa Rosa. Is that right?
Yeah, it's built in 1912.
That's a really cool property.
Yeah, it's an amazing place.
Yeah.
And then you took us off to this really amazing place in the Sierra Nevada foothills, where we met Gideon Bienstock. Bienstock, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And that's Gideon here on the right. And and we sat in his cellar or in his wine production area for, I don't know, 3 hours. Consuming, again, all kinds of really interesting and wonderful wines. Probably one of the most memorable of that seating was his taken from Granite, which was had a great story to it. But I'm not going to take the time right now to go into that. But
well, I will mention that both Randall and Gideon are the subjects of two chapters. Each has a chapter in my book.
Oh, excellent.
Right.
Yeah, and they're really interesting stories. They're two of the most deeply thoughtful, kind of philosophical winemakers, in the U.S., if not the world.
Yeah, we had a remarkable time during our entire visit out to California. But those two occasions were especially memorable for us, and we learned a lot. We took a lot home from that. So thank you for that, Clark.
And then again, when you put us in contact with Edward in South Africa, one of the just great highlights.
Yeah, Edmund.
Edmund, yes.
Edmund.
By the way, I'm going to do a paella class today, and the only cognac I have in the house is Edmund's. So we've been tasting it, and it's really a crime to throw it in a paella, but I'm going to do it anyway. Boy, oh boy, is that stuff good.
Oh yeah, fantastic stuff.
So Clark, I've got a few questions that we've prepared.
Well, how about if for a second here, I just bring my wife Ruthie in here to just kind of testify, because when we got together in Pennsylvania, you gave me this bottle of Hermitage.
Yes.
Which, of course, how on earth you ever got that by the TTB is You know,
And we've got it passed, and we're not changing that label. We're just
hell no. You can't change anything on this label. But good for you. And of course, it's a perfect name for you guys. But I knew you wouldn't have given it to me if it wasn't pretty good. So we played it last night with some lamb. And what did you think, Ruthie?
I was just amazed that it has this wonderful energy about it, and sort of a tanginess that's I find just intriguing. And you know, in addition to just wonderful mouthfeel and palate and all of that, that energy was striking.
Thank you, Ruthie. I really love that vintage. It's our 2017 vintage, and the way it's put together is from 4 different barrels of types of wines, all of which are made from dark berries, and all of them have their own very distinctive character that's not really great on its own, but as soon as you blend them together, it creates this wonderfully harmonious wine. And yeah, there's that. There's that.
Like a Chateauneuf du Pape, you know, where you have a lot of little influences in there. I thought it's more fruity than most of the, you know, the Rhone wines that I would come across. And I kind of think that what has that palate energy is that it has lots of color, but not a lot of tannin. And so it can handle a little higher acidity and have that bright, lively mouthfeel without making the wine harsh by bringing in too much salivary protein that would otherwise attack those tannins and make it, you know, really grainy.
Yeah, it doesn't, the fruit doesn't have much in the way of tannins, but it's got a lot of acidity, and they seem to hold up really well. We had a wonderful person on a live Zoom, Diane Carter, a few episodes ago, a week or two ago, Bob.
She's with us now.
She opened up a 2012 Hermitage to have during the thing. And
A
she,
real one.
And Chuck and Bob and I had a reminiscing Zoom event, and Chuck opened up a early 2012 version of what later became Hermitage. It wasn't even called that yet.
I'll bet.
It was BEC, I think, was just scrawled on the bottle, and that was for blackberries, elderberries, and cassis, blackcurrant. Yeah.
Oh, currant. Oh, okay.
Yeah, blackcurrant. Yeah.
So what happened? Did you shut the other wine down?
No, it's just every one of these. I haven't found too many where it's you know, doing the exact same thing each time. So every time is a nuance and change to it. So we really like the Hermitage and the format, but it's structured slightly differently each year. Same thing with our Lake House Red and our Red Scare, and a lot of the complex blends continue to evolve. I'm trying to figure out how to get that right balance and feel and see how it evolves and changes in the bottle.
Well, I think, you know, despite our different raw materials, I think our vision is very similar. You know, Roger Dial, who's my editor when I was working for Appellation America, talked about my faux chablis, and he wrote an article in which he called me a master forger. And we actually have on our website a drop-down menu for all the European forgeries we make. And I think you're kind of trying to do the same thing with even screwier rum.
Yeah, it's even, you know, like in that first time with you and in the book, you know, reading about that, our wines are heavily manipulated.
Yeah, darn too.
They're complete, yeah, they're just cooked up for sure. Yeah, it's great.
Well, you know, I think all wines are heavily manipulated, none of them as much as any beer. And you know, we're just chefs, and I think we should be proud of what we do. And
Oh yeah.
To me, the only moral high ground is honesty. So don't ever do anything you're not willing to brag about, and just make great wine, and I think people will forgive you.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great.
Well, thank you for sharing that your dinner story and your experience with Hermitage, Clark. That was nice, and nice to see you again, Ruth.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to coming out again someday and seeing you both again in person. I hope sometime in the not too distant future. But that brings me to another.
I think I'm going to dismiss Ruth. She's got to clear all the kitchen counters for my cooking show.
Okay, nice to see you, Ruth. So, speaking of travel, just let's put this right out there now before we get too far along. I mean, one of the reasons that we're inspired to do more virtual live posts here is due to the global pandemic that we're all experiencing. So let's just start right out with, how has that impacted your life, your work, and what are you doing about it?
Well, I'll talk about me personally, and then I'll talk a little about its impact on the industry. So for me, I actually got tested positive for the virus on March 17th, had a very mild case, about 3 days of unpleasantness, and then I've been asymptomatic for about 7 weeks. And so I think I'm through it, and, pretty lucky to be so, since I'm, in one of them, their cohorts that is at risk. So, and Ruthie, she didn't even show any symptoms at all. And I do believe that getting tested with the PCR, they're only testing people that are in really, really bad shape, with oxygen levels below 94%. And I never even ran a fever, so that's not a very good test. But when you look at your percentage of dying, we had a scientist last night talking about singing, because we're choral singers. I sing a lot, and so does Ruth. Ruthie's the musical director and all that. So we care about singing. And she was saying, I'm 60 years old and I have a 15% chance of dying if I contract the virus. That's not so. That statistic is derived from your chances if you've been tested. But most people only get tested if they're going to pretty much die anyway. So what we've seen instead is people like Ruthie, they just never even get it at all. And we think that we're much, much further along in this thing than we thought, that a much smaller number of people are susceptible. And so we have some hope that we'll get through this thing in the relatively near future. But for me, we don't have a tasting room. We don't sell very much to retailers. Because I make crazy wine, just like you guys make crazy. Who's going to put it on the shelf at the grocery store? I make my current vintage of Chardonnay at Faux Chablis is 2005. Right mind would put that in a store, unless they were willing to really push it. And there aren't very many retailers, even before the virus, that were willing to or really like delighted to sell Norton and Saint Laurent and Timon Sang and all of the nutty stuff I do, much less the kind of nutty stuff you guys do. So we're almost all, personal and direct to consumer. We do a lot of flash sales on something called Casemates. In fact, I'm in the middle of one right now, and they're geeks. They like the honesty. They like that I'll answer any question. They like that I'm exploring, as you are, the idea that American wines can be like European wines, maybe even better. And so we're doing fine. We're much better off than anybody else because we had been preparing for this moment for 20 years. That being said, I'm much better at Zoom than I used to be. we're learning a lot of skills. I'm doing much more video editing than I used to do. I've been doing it for a long time, since 2008, but now I'm really doing it. And so I kind of like reaching out to these, people one-on-one. Now, in the rest of the industry, to begin with, wine has always been considered recession-proof. If you've been drinking $100 bottle now, in the recession you drink a $50 bottle, you do a little more research and you find out that it's actually better than the one you were buying for $100 without doing any research. And if you were buying $50, now you're going to $25, but it's the same thing. And so we actually get a stronger link, and people are not buying wine in restaurants, but they are buying at retail, and certainly direct-to-consumer sales are up by about tenfold, which is really straining our systems. We can't get stuff out the next day anymore, but that's an enduring value that will. We're learning a lot of skills that will be with us after the pandemic. And for me personally, just being able to reach out to these very thinly spread geeks all over the country in a powerful way is just great for me. But for other wineries, they're really struggling to get their systems up and running.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Clark. Let's step back for a minute and step away from this crisis and maybe go back a little bit in time. I'm fascinated by your background and your history, and I love the story of dropping out of MIT to go work in a wine shop in California. That's a small tidbit of it. Why don't you just, if you could, for our audience, let everybody know a little bit about your background. How did you get started, and what sort of brought you along to today?
I'm wondering how far to go back. I think I'll start with my dad was literally a rocket scientist, and he went to MIT as well, and then worked for a whole bunch of outfits, Martin Aviation and Lockheed and all of these guys in aviation engineering. And we were up in Schenectady, and he was working on a thing called the Skybolt missile, and he brought by a 16 millimeter movie projector and strung up a sheet, and he showed us a Polaris missile being launched from a submarine. And he said, "This means that everything I've done for the last 2 years is obsolete. Mr. Kennedy wants to put a man on the moon. We're going to Florida." So I lived in Volusia County in Daytona Beach, and of the hanging chats, and when I had been there for about 3 years, the rednecks and the retirees who don't care about education down there voted all the money away from the Volusia County school system. So all these engineers' kids, and there are about 35,000 of us, we're not going to be able to go to college. So so this of high school kids going to private schools all over the South, and somehow or another, I mean, this is the reason I'm telling you this story is that so many things have happened to me that show some kind of organized intent. And so, I mean, I don't really get religious about this, but this was a weird thing to happen just by itself. And where I ended up was a school in the backwoods of Birmingham called Indian Springs School, a military school, and I ended up in what we later learned was the best private school in the country, the highest percentage of merit finalists since 1955 to today. And so that's where I learned to write. That's where I learned to do math. I was the 2-year math champion in the state of Alabama. That's where I learned to speak French. And I got all this preparation for the later life that I was to drop into by accident. So when I was at MIT, I mean, I had I had Noam Chomsky, I had Luria, Teuber, Francis Crick. I had about 12 of the top scientists in the world teaching the freshman classes, because that's what they do. They make the head of the departments teach the freshman classes. And then I did that for 2 years, and then, and a whole lot of folk singing. And then in junior year, you have to declare a major. And there was just too much delicious stuff on the menu. And I said, I think I'm going to take a little while off and try to figure out which of those things I really want to do. So I wandered out to California with no clear aim in mind, with a guy named Bob Hagman. We put about 10,000 miles on this Peugeot, and we went all through Canada, and we went down to Mexico, but they wouldn't let us in because our hair was too long. And then I finally washed up on the beach of Berkeley. And I just needed a job. So a friend of mine said, well, why don't you come to work for me in the liquor store? At this time, there were about 250 wineries in the United States. And all I knew about it was that I had been a crepier, a crepe chef in Boston, and I'd gotten kind of a Jones on for Matus Rosé, and which is still really good, by the way, and Beaujolais and stuff like that. So I liked wine, but I really didn't know anything about it. And a guy came up to me with a bottle of Paul Masson Dry and asked me if it was any good. And I told him I have no idea. So I took a bottle home that night, and it was all right. And pretty soon I drunk every bottle in the store. We had about 1,000 SKUs from these 250 wineries. And then I started visiting wineries. And when I finally got up to Oregon, I was at Tualatin with Bill Fisher in 1976. And he said, well, on the way out, going back down the driveway, we was there with me and my wife. And I said, you know, I got to do this. I can't just sell this stuff. I got to actually do it. And she said, very snarkily, she said, well, I was wondering when you were going to figure that out. So that was the beginning. And I got a job at Vinovation, which was a tiny little winery in Berkeley. I did that for 3 years. And then I went back to Davis, and as you said, got the bachelor's and master's. And then these guys from the Dunnigan Hills up in Yolo County, which is where Davis is, got a hold of me, and first they wanted me to just teach them wine lessons. They were growers. They had center pivots and a whole lot of wheat, and they spent a couple $1 million growing dwarf wheat on these hills because you couldn't furrow irrigate them. You couldn't grow tomatoes like everybody else does. And so they you know, center pivot technology is very energy intensive. So when Afghanistan and, you know, the market for, we stopped shipping wheat to Russia. And so the market dropped out. And then with almost simultaneously the Iranian embassy thing where we stopped buying oil and energy prices went through the roof. These guys just knew they couldn't, their business model was not going to work. They needed to put in a permanent crop. They simply chose grapes because that's the one that comes in the fastest. Yeah. We're thinking about pistachios, but you know, it takes 10 years. So they said, okay, we'll just do grapes. So here they were, really pregnant with 900 tons of Chenin Blanc and Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. And I told them, well, you're never going to sell those grapes to anyone unless you prove the quality of your region. And it just happened by coincidence that I had made about 5 gallons of Dunnigan Hill Sauvignon Blanc the previous year. And I said, you've got really nice Sauvignon Blanc there and you can grow it cheap. So I think you have to start a winery or get out of the grape business. Just tear it all out. So we started R.H. Phillips in 1983, and we were 3,000 cases. And by the way, we didn't lose money. We made about $50,000. So then they really liked that, and we grew 13-fold in the next year to 42,000 cases. We didn't lose money. We made $50,000. And then the next year was 145,000 cases. And, you know, we weren't selling any grapes. They liked making wine and selling it for cheap. And, you know, we had a $3.99 Sauvignon Blanc that was just as good as anything out of Napa and Sonoma for 2 or 3 times that price. So we never did sell any grapes. In fact, I finally got a contract from Mondavi and they turned it down because they were just having so much fun. And they got all the way to 1/3 cases in 7 years, and we were still making $50,000. So I got interested, and I've told the story to 1,000 winemakers, and they all kind of say, yeah, that's kind of how it is. I kind of think maybe Ernest and Julia were splitting, you know, 25 grand a piece. And, you know, but so then in 1990, I left and I started Winesmith, and I decided to see how small I could get and still make $50,000. So we were about 1,000 cases and doing that for, oh golly, 1990 through this year. So that's, what is that anyway?
That's
38 years.
Almost 40 years.
30 years.
And then what happened is Ruthie decided that she really wanted to join the company and take the money management off my shoulders. And so now we're trying to be 2,000 cases to pay for that.
Yeah, that's a recent change, right?
Yeah, she just came in last July.
Yeah. Okay. I think you mentioned that at the EWE. We saw you in Lancaster just before this virus broke.
Just before,
Yeah.
like the week before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
were it not for that, I wouldn't have had that nice dinner last night.
So Clark, tell us about Vinovation.
Well, that goes back to Bruno Benziger's liver. When I started consulting in 1990, Bruno Benziger was a hard-drinking Marine, and he loved his Scotch. And Benziger still imports, you know, all the Scotch and Irish whiskey in the United States. So he was a big friend of Joe Kennedy and, you know, that whole Irish group. And so anyway, Bruno's doctor told him that he needed to quit drinking or he was going to die. So he went out, he decided to he's still got to market something. So he decided to make non-alcoholic wine, and he bought a reverse osmosis unit. So when I came in, they marched me up the hill and they chained me to this machine. I didn't even know what it was, and I wasn't very happy. And I spent 3 years and about $500,000 learning how to make reasonably good non-alcoholic wine. But in the middle of that, this guy named Bruce Rector was kind of the guru of the. He was a 20% owner and really interesting guy. We'll have to go see him sometime too.
Yeah.
So he organized, we were now up to about 4 million cases of Chardonnay, largest Chardonnay producer in the world. And we had, you know, starting from nothing in the around 1980. So this was like 1990, and they had grown to the largest producer in the world at, you know, $3.99, 2 for $7 at Safeway, Proprietor's Reserve Chardonnay. So Bruce would take our 57 reps from every US state and Canadian province and our 40 winemakers, and 100 of us would go out in the woods every 3 months or so and think deep thoughts. And, you know, press the envelope and think outside the box and all that stuff. And we would always invite in crazy people, like the guy that do you remember the Scratch and Sniff survey in National Geographic magazine that came out in the 60s? And this is when Scratch and Sniff was just brand new. And they had 2 million respondents. So they found out one of the strips had something called eugenol, it's the smell of cloves. And they found out that 14% of Americans can't smell it. it's an important oak constituent. So you just need to know as a winemaker that a lot of people can't smell an important element in your wines. So that was really interesting. And me and another guy named Don Blackburn, who's where I got the wine and music stuff from, were the kind of in-house crazies. So I shared a lot of things I'd learned from non-alcoholic wine, because, you know, when you take all the alcohol out, you can put flavors in it, which is not legal for standard vinifera wine. So I suppose you guys can do anything you want, but that's what you really do. Anyway, we could now put flavors in, but what we found out is that when we dealkalize the wine into a sort of a neutral base, and then we put in things like well, let's say blueberry or flavor, or you know, orange peel or whatever, that they didn't integrate. And that's when I started to understand the importance of structure.
Yeah.
But, you know, so the wines were getting better and better, but they were never really all that good. In the middle of all this, I did this quality symposium thing where I said, you know, we can't use flavor company stuff, but we can learn a lot from those guys because they capture flavor. You remember the old Smucker's ad where they had a denser on the top of the pot? Yeah, well, that's a good idea for fermentation. You guys should be doing it too. Just figure out a way to condense your off-gas CO2, and it'll drip right back down to the fermenter and get more flavor. Yeah. And so we were looking at how to capture flavors from skins and yeast, and then at the end I said, well, what about off flavor capture? This whole idea is to separate the good actors from the bad actors, and then remove the bad actors and return the good actors. And so I said, let's apply this to off flavor harvesting. Suppose there's a bad actor in the wine already. You can use RO as I had to come up with an example. This is like the night before I came up with this idea, and I said, well, reverse osmosis permeate. It's a really, really tight filter, like 10,000 times tighter than the ones we use for sterile bottling. And if you take a black inky Cabernet and you put it against an RO, all that comes out is water. It looks like water. It has alcohol in it, and it also has acetic acid, but none of the other acids. So you've got vinegar, a little bit of ethyl acetate too, which is the smell of vinegar. And then you just put it through a water softener and recombine it, and it would take out those acids and put the alcohol and water back. And I just threw that out there at the end of the talk. So then the next day, Charlie Talbert comes up to me and says, well, do you think that would actually work? Because we have a Merlot that's stuck at about half again the legal limit of VA, and we can't get it to re-ferment. We've been trying to do it for a year. And I said, well, I don't know, but we could go put together a resin column and find out. And sure enough, the wine started re-fermenting even while we were processing it. So we knew, I mean, big surprise that when you pickle something, you know, you tend to knock down the microbial content. So yeah, it worked like a charm. And so then I went to Joe Benziger, who was my boss, and he had this RO, he didn't have anything to do with it. And I said, you know, Joe, if you'll throw in your truck, I'll give you $100 a day to take this thing mobile and go take vinegar out of people's wines. And we estimated, I talked to all the brokers and labs, and I said, how much volatile acidity wine is out there? And they all estimated of the 100 million gallons of wine we make in California that it was somewhere between 35,000 and 80,000 gallons per year for the whole state. Wow. But I'll tell you what, I used to say, if you could come up with a cure for AIDS, you'll find out how many of your friends have it.
Yeah.
And that's basically what happened to us is, again, this is just, you know, what my father used to say, you know, you fell into the outhouse and came out smelling like a rose. This has happened to me a lot of times. And one of them was just that word spread like wildfire that we could do this. And I now know, because it's the same every year, that number of gallons is actually 2 million. It's about 2% of the wine we make goes to vinegar, and we bring it all back from the dead. So that was the beginning of Vinovation, and we never advertised. It was just so good an idea that the guys talked it up in the bars. They say, he took some vinegar out of my wine, and now I'm getting. And so we just grew like crazy. But the trouble was this big machine just had one filter in it. It was built to take 8. And so we got a call from Beau Barrett at Chateau Marmont, and he said, I've got almost all my estate Cabernet is stuck with VA. And this was in November. And I said, he said, can you put me in? I said, well, we're doing about 1,000 gallons a day with this machine, so we can slot you in May. And he said, no, that's not going to work. There's got to be a way for you to come here sooner. And I said, well, sure. I was just trying to, shoo him away. I said, well, the problem with this machine is that it's only going at 1/8 of the speed. I could be doing 8,000 gallons a day, but I need 7 more filters and some replumbing, and it's going to cost me about $40,000 to do it. And I just don't see it happening. But if you will give me a check for $40,000, I will take 3 weeks, take the machine out of service, and then I'll show up at your place on the 1st of December. And he went to Jim, and they mud wrestled for a little while, and then he sent us a check. I mean, really? and we did all that, and we actually put his estate Cabernet as a Best Buy in the Spectator. And on the way out, it was kind of like, the Lone Ranger. We were kind of the Lone Ranger, and he kind of said, thank you, Masked Man, because we didn't tell anybody until he told everybody himself at Jim's funeral about 10 years ago. And that's the only reason that I'm outing him here, is that he's gone public with it. But, if that hadn't happened, Vinovation never would have gotten off the ground. And I could tell you a whole lot of other things like that just happened by accident, and led me eventually to be a magnet for technologies from other people. And that's why Patrick Ducournau and the guys at Unidev that are microoxygenation and wine structure guys and the premium oak chips guys got a hold of me in 1997 and taught me. They said, well, we have a way to stabilize color, balance reduction, increase longevity, increase the volume of mouthfeel, integrate bell pepper and oak and microbial characteristics. This big long list of your Christmas list as a winemaker. You say, all you have to do is abandon everything you think you know about winemaking. And so we put something on our website. We said, we don't believe a word of this, but everybody wants to try it. And and they had to sign a waiver. Say, if you're going to use this gear and it screws up your wine, I warned you. And 2 years later, we took it down. And now it's been our basic practice for almost everything we make for the last 20 years.
Wow.
And finally, so we kind of turned into a cooking school. And that's why I wrote the book. Part of the reason is winemakers are doing all this stuff, but they don't like to talk about it because they're afraid of the natural wine movement and manipulation. We touched on that earlier. That all wine is manipulated. Get over yourself. You don't really care as long as it's good.
Right.
And as we have less conversation among ourselves about technique, you actually end up with wine that tastes manipulated, but it's not because there's nothing wrong with cooking or artisanality, but it's bad cooking,
Yeah.
not getting better because we don't talk to each other because we're afraid to get outed that we actually do our job. So
That's a good place to ask you the question of, and it kind of summed this up in a way that sort of simplify a little bit. What does it mean to you to be a winemaker? What does that mean? It means a lot of, I mean, from what I've heard over the years, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So, but you sort of come at this differently than most people that I know. And so could you sum up what it means to be a winemaker?
well, I do want to, okay. I want later, let's talk about winemakers in general, but I mean, it's just right in the beginning of the book. It says the definition of winemaking is to connect the human soul to the soul of a place by rendering its grapes into liquid music. And I think that's my job.
Nicely
Yes.
said.
Liquid music. I remember going to a course in the Finger Lakes that you taught a few years.
Oh, you went to that one.
Yes, I went to that one.
Wasn't that great?
Yes, that was wonderful. And it was just, I read about it in your book, but hadn't experienced it with the wines and the switching of the music and how instantaneous that situation is. That however it works, the vibrations or the symmetries, the things that are working, it is different. That wine and music relate to one another, and
I think wine is liquid music.
Yeah,
I think that it carries emotion. If you think about Cabernet Sauvignon, you can imagine that it wouldn't taste very good if you were playing a polka. It's not a cheerful wine. It's a dark, angry wine. And I mean, why? I'm talking about People Are Strange by the Doors or Beethoven's Fifth, the beginning of it.
Yeah.
They're angry pieces of music. They're not dance music. Why does anybody even like them? Why does anybody smoke Cuban cigars? I mean, they're horrible. But they carry this profundity. And if you can match the emotion of the wine with the emotion of the music, then that Cabernet that might have been harsh and bitter becomes round and sweet. And then you come back and, play it with some Dixieland or something, and it's going to be horrible. Most of the time, music that works with Cabernet does not work with Pinot Noir. It makes it much harsher so that the Pinots appear to have more tannin than the Cabernets. Pinot likes romantic music. It likes the love theme from Superman. It likes Tom Waits' Jersey Girl or Night Moves.
What's Hermitage like?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, maybe. But in some ways, Hermitage is more like, because of that mineral energy, it's a little bit more like Cabernet Franc.
So there's often a lot of Radiohead playing at my winery when I'm making Hermit. So they may relate somehow together, capture some of that energy.
I don't know anything about that. That's a little bit like Masuro's, The Secret Life of Water. And
yes.
He used to believe in that. He had 26 speakers in his cellar. This is the guy, Don Blackburn was the other crazy, and he's the one that first showed us this whole thing about wine music. And I wouldn't be doing it now, except that he died of cancer about 20 years ago. So, but what I was going to suggest is you might try it with some rock and roll. Because Cabernet Franc likes Fire Down Below by Bob Seger, and it likes Bruce Springsteen's Jungle Land.
Very good.
I'd give it a whirl, just
definitely
because of that energetic edge.
Oh, that's great. So another question that I'm interested to explore with you is you've been teaching winemakers for years at UC Davis with your work there. And I'm curious, what do you see today, young winemakers who are coming up under you and graduating from UC Davis in the last few years? What do you see coming up in the future? What are this younger generation of winemakers going to be bringing to the art of winemaking in the next 10 years?
Well, it's pretty wide range.
Sure.
They are of a generation that cares much more about environmental issues, and there's a lot more interest in biodynamics and organic practices, and some of them at least are good. Like if you take Morgan Peterson, for example, he's very good at relating his dreams and visions to the public. In my generation, there were very few outgoing winemakers, but in the days of social media, and they're just able to do that to articulate their vision more readily. I think they have a lot to unlearn from Davis. I would say anybody that goes to Davis, they need to get my book, and they need to get Randall Graham's Been Dune So Long.
Yeah, that's a great book.
That's a good book.
It's a great book, and it has a list of 32 things I wish to hell they had taught me before I went to Davis.
Yeah.
Like don't ever go to Davis unless you've traveled in Europe. No. Because Davis isn't really a winemaking school. It's an extremely good place to go for scientific training. But it teaches you a model of wine that, as I think it was H.L. Mencken that said, it's not what we know that gets us in trouble, or it's not what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's the things we know for sure that just ain't so.
Yeah, there you go.
And
Boy,
so I do think that
poignant
there's a
today.
period. I'm just saying that you got to, as I did, I spent 10 years at R.H. Phillips, basically towing the scientific line. And at the end of it, I was making wonderful modern white wines, really nice Sauvignon Blanc, and really crappy red wines. And so it took me another 10 years going to France and working with the University of Bordeaux and later on Patrick Ducournau to learn the things that I eventually put into my book.
So speaking of your book, again, sum it up briefly if you can. Why should a young winemaker, or for that matter, any winemaker, pick up your book today? What are they what's the gist of it? What are they gonna get out of that? And why do you recommend it?
Well,
Let me jump in for a second on that.
why don't you give your version?
Because that was hugely impactful to me as a new young winemaker, never going to Davis or having any background in it. I'm a structural geologist. I'm a scientist that likes fermented beverages, and started brewing beer, and Bob and Chuck and I were making wine and really getting into that, and it made sense to us to explore what grew really well in our environment to see if we could craft wine out of it, because the best wines that we were tasting from around the world came from those geographic locations where the grapes grew really well.
Yeah.
That sort of set us down this path, and I was exploring and experimenting with different things, and
including drugs, I'm sure.
going through the literature to see what other people were doing. Not much in the way of fruit wines, other than sort of the typical quicker turnaround, sweeter format fruit wines. And so I got a lot of information from people working with classic vinifera grapes to make drier style wines. So I was trying to use those to balance my own crafting. And then I come along this new book, Postmodern Winemaking. What the hell is this? So I started reading, and I'm just captured, one, with your prose right off the front. You're just a brilliant writer, such fun reading. And then two, you were just taking everything that was sort of the standard, the Davis model, and saying, it doesn't need to be done that way. Look at this example. Look at this example. Think about this. What about that? And just showing all of the different things. My mind was in a place where it was open and available to these new concepts. But I think that's for any winemaker at any stage of their profession or their pursuit, this book is immensely valuable to them. Now that's my take on it. It's been huge. I've bought many copies. I've handed it to other people. I've read it a few times. It's just so that's my preamble for your book.
Thank you. Well, let's see. I'm not sure if I should have constructed the book the way I did, because it's a difficult book in the beginning. So here's what I would say. If you get this book, and I about half the people that read it are not winemakers, but they want to know what winemaking is really about. What is our conversation? And if you're one of those people, the first half of the book is going to be a challenge for you. Yeah. So what I always say is, and I'll go into some more detail, but basically skim the first half and just get what you get. And what you will get is an appreciation of our world, although you may not be able to connect all the dots. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But the first thing that anybody that hasn't made wine should do is to go to the first appendix, which is Winemaking Basics. And it's 6 or 8 pages that I think does a pretty darn good job of summarizing what winemaking is. You need to know that before you go into the book. Then the preface is about me. It's about 8 pages. Pretty much everything we just said. And then the introduction is a longer section. It's funny because when I sent the reviews out to several people, Josh Peterson at I love that man, and he read it and he sent me this 13-page scathing review of the thing in which he pointed out that I had never actually said what I meant by postmodern. So I went in and wrote that chapter about what postmodernism is and where it comes from and how it relates to architecture and theater and all this other stuff. Came out in the 70s, and then how I think that relates to our work as winemakers. And in a nutshell, it's breaking with a modern theory and going off in all kinds of different directions, and doing something that's local, that makes sense for your particular vision of what you're trying to do. Which consumers are you trying to connect to? What is your piece of ground? And what is the art that you're going to use to render your fruit into liquid music? So then chapter 1 is called The Solution Problem. And it's the solution problem is that the Davis view is that wine is a chemical solution. And it isn't. They're talking about it like it was a consommé when it's really like a lobster bisque. And which one are you going to order? A lobster bisque is a 2-part system. It has butter beads in it. It basically has polar and apolar all put together in very fine contact with, there's square miles of surface area in a teaspoon of Béarnaise sauce. Same kind of thing. So the chapter explores all of the things that we think are true because wine is a chemical solution. And none of them are true. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we get into talking about the functions of oak. We get into what graceful aging is like. We get into vineyard enology. In other words, going into a vineyard as if you were going to make wine instead of just growing houseplants. And finally, we get to this thing, the central chapter and the hardest one in the book, is about the basic strange reaction called the vicinal-diphenol cascade. That is how we tack the Tinker Toys together with oxygen to make a rich light structure, kind of like this tannin souffle. Anyway, then we get into minerality, whatever the heck that is, biodynamics, harshness and astringency.
Yeah.
Those 11 chapters are tough.
Yeah.
turn the page and we start talking about winemaking's lunatic heroes. You know, Davi, who had the temerity to plant Cabernet Sauvignon in the frozen tundra of Oakville. He was the southernmost winery in the Napa Valley, and everybody thought he was crazy. Dr. Constantine Frank and the growing the Finger Lakes. What a crazy idea that was. And Richard Summer up in Oregon, and you guys would certainly be in the sequel to the book. You will definitely qualify as lunatic heroes.
Yeah. That's chapter 10 or chapter 11, I think. Yeah.
There is nothing in the scientific method, and there is nothing in your course at Davis that will direct you to be a crazy idiot and try something like you've done. Yeah. It's just, you know, science will come along as, it's not the engine of progress anymore, it's the caboose. You know, it's clerical.
Hey, Bonnie.
Is there another book in the works?
There is.
Oh, fantastic.
I've actually been writing it for 20 years. And I think it's really going to be a bestseller. And it's called The Myth of Science.
Wow. Great.
Yeah, I don't know.
When do we get to see it?
I really think modern science has kind of, it's doing more harm than good right now. And it's these similar themes on a world stage. And, you know, science, I'm a scientist. I think science is great. But
it's just that there's so much sort of deconstruction. We feel that if we break things into the parts, we'll actually understand how it all works. And there's
right. That's right. I believe
that's going to work.
That's called reductionism, the aroma wheel.
Yeah.
I wrote an article about this in 1996 called "Where's the Theory of Deliciousness?" Because I think, and really soulfulness, I'm quite sure is an emergent property of the whole. It would be like taking a Beethoven symphony and going,
each note.
There's a lot of A sharp here.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's why it's so great. He's just using a lot of A sharp. Where in fact, the soulfulness is an emergent property of the whole. And I think that's important in wine. So
when do you think we might get to read this new book?
Well, it's going to be at least 3 years. I loved the process with UC Press with my book, but it took a year to, I mean, first of all, it's going to take me at least a year to finish the book. And that's mostly around, Samuel Clemens said, take the part you like the best and delete it. That's the best. But I have got a structure for the thing, and I kind of know what all the chapters are. And if I can just get a little free time, I think I can kick them out in about a year. Going to talk about science versus religion. We're going to talk about science versus the law. People have no respect for lawyers, but they should. And they have lots of respect for scientists. But publication happens in a smoke-filled room among cronies, where the law happens in public.
Yeah.
And I think the legal process is much more legitimate than the scientific process today. I'm just talking about today. I want to go back to, and we are going back, this is interesting, to where journals are irrelevant. You just publish online. So you get immediate results and everybody can see them. And there isn't any vetting.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating process. I finished up my doctoral studies in the late 80s, and going through that whole process of publishing or perishing and going through with viewing of journals and all of that inbred sort of system that was there, trying to get grant money. It's about connections. It's not necessarily about brilliant science or great breakthroughs. It's about a structure, a game that you've got to work with.
It's very political.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more work on the phases of the moon, but nobody's ever going to get grant money for that because it sounds too much like astrology. And you have this observable phenomenon that there are tides and there are, sometimes it's over there and sometimes it's over there, and maybe that matters. The Guatemalans certainly think so. And you'll never get a budding over team to work at the full of the moon. They say this makes a sap run and you get a bad take. But part of the problem is we just aren't set up to evaluate cyclical systems.
Right.
We do linear regressions. We don't know how to do cyclical regressions. Yeah. It's easily doable. It's just a different kind of math, but we're not used to it.
Right.
So anyway,
we'll look forward to learning more about all of this when your book comes out in a few years.
Yeah, it's going to be a nightmare to go through when they're looking at every comma.
Yeah.
Justify it.
So
that process is really what made the book the way it is.
So, Clark, I asked this question of everybody I've been talking to recently, and kind of been looking forward to asking it of you. Have you figured out what you want to be when you grow up?
I'm there. I am totally there. I win the lottery, you give me $1 billion. I know where I can put 30 grand of it, basically into my next harvest. And after that, I don't know, I don't want it'd be a pain in the ass. I already have the life that anybody could possibly want. So do you guys. If I gave you $1 billion, you just keep stomping out in the woods and finding wild blueberries, wouldn't you? I'd be looking around for charities. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, what have I got? I got. I'm small enough that I can, and I have a good enough following that I have full range artistic expression the way I like it, as opposed to like what we were trying to do with Phillips, which is the Phillips Safeway. I have a dynamite wife. I have a lot of pleasure in my life. I even have some pretty good cats, and more than anything else, I get to relate. And I should have mentioned this when we were talking about UCD. Most of the important winemakers that are coming out now and doing things kind of like you're doing are in the Midwest. And they've been working the family farm, 1,000 acres, trying to grow wheat and outcompete Cargill. And they just can't do it. Maybe sometimes they can, but it's really feast and famine. And so what they've been doing is leasing out 995 of those acres to Cargill, and then putting in, 6 acres of La Crescent and Petite Pearl and Marquette and some of these new varieties, and making wine for the tourists that drive out for their music festival and to pet their dog from Des Moines. By the way, if you want to know more about this, you gotta see Wine Diamonds. It's such a great movie about that revolution.
Yeah, Wine Diamonds.
Get the trailer on YouTube and then spend the $14 and get the darn thing. It's a feature film, very well done. But see, what I love is throwing people a rope. These people, it's all mom and pop farmers, and they have no idea what kind of trouble they're in terms of compliance, even in terms of vision. Everything from figuring out your purpose to building a team to getting the right software to doing financial planning then you can figure out what you should plan, and then winery floor plans, equipment selection, and a website that tells your story, and then sales systems. We do all of that, and we do it cheap, and we're small. So, we know how to do it because we've already made most of the mistakes you're going to make. So I have about 120 clients that, are all over me all the time in all these different areas to help them out. And all those mistakes were painful, but that's how you learn.
Yeah.
And to be able to then pass that knowledge along, don't do it this way, makes it feel a little better. So anyway, I'm I'm riding high here. I just want to do this. I just want to live as long as I can and make as much wine experimentally as I can, have loving relationships with my consumers and with my winemaker clients. That's all I want. Well,
That's great.
Great.
except barbershop.
That's great. So we do need to wrap it up pretty soon. So
Yep.
there's a couple things I wanted to get out before we do. First of all, if people have an interest in trying your wine, let us know the best way that our audience here in New Hampshire might be able to get their hands on some of it.
Well, that would be really good. If you're watching this now, you want to get on Casemates because we've got a 3-pack of 3 of our very best wines on sale there for the next, well, till Sunday night. And it's a heck of a deal.
Casemates can ship to New Hampshire?
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
But you know, if they can't, we can just ship it to you ourselves.
I know.
Contact you directly?
I know on your website for
Yeah.
your brand, you can ship to New Hampshire.
Yeah, so there you go. So that might happen. You want to call my assistant winemaker, Sandra Johnson. The number is 707-332-0056. So then more generally, and she's like, you know, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 West Coast time. But then more generally, you want to go to whoisclarksmith.com.
Yeah.
And that connects everything we got. And then just go up to, it says shop, click on shop, and you'll see the drop-down menus for all of our forgeries and oddities. And
Yeah.
So Clark, after we get off this video, if you send me a couple links and that phone number via email, I'll make sure to post it in the description of the video so that everybody who's watching it can have that information handy.
That's great. That's great.
So to wrap it up, first of all, 2 things. One, is there anything that I missed or we missed that you think would be really important as sort of parting words to let everybody know about yourself or what you're doing? Or?
Well, we have a bad marriage right now between consumers and winemakers, even between the trade and winemakers. The trade has bought into this natural wine thing that basically says that the best wines are made through benign neglect. And there's not a winemaker on the planet that believes that. And they would all, see, they don't make any money. So they would love to be honest and open. But they're never going to do it while Alice Firing is firing live ammo over their heads if they come clean. So I think winemakers have made a mistake by not talking more about the new technologies, and but there's something that you can do as a consumer. As a winemaker, I say you're chicken shit if you're not going to tell people what you're doing. Don't do anything you don't want to brag about, and then start bragging about it. And the heck with the natural wine movement. As consumers, what you can do is establish a personal relationship and then ask all the questions you want. We love to talk about what we do. But that's how you mend a bad marriage, is you just get into conversation about things that might make you a little uncomfortable. And that's how we turn this back into the joyful exercise it used to be in the 70s.
That's great. Thank you. And is there anything that you wanted to ask of us, or any questions that you wanted to bring to light before we go?
I did actually, in this spirit, Ken, if you're willing to talk about it. I was wondering what influence you think that those French oak Allier untoasted chips that I recommended to you have made in your winemaking.
So honestly, I haven't had a chance to incorporate those yet, but they're on the top of my list, and I will keep you posted on everything that happens with those. So I'm really looking forward to it. I just, with everything I got going on, it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen.
I'm eager to learn. I think you're going to love them.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to it.
Well, thank you guys for the honor of this exposure. Really appreciate
Oh,
it.
the honor's ours.
Yeah,
There is one thing, and you can
Yep.
put this on the site if you want. If you go onto my site and want to buy something, you want to use I know Clark as the promo code at the end. All capital spaces. IKNOWCLARK. And that'll get you 20% off on single bottles and 36% off on cases.
Great.
that's great. Hey, we have a guest who's asked if you can ship your wines to Mass. So I'm going to guess you
can.
probably can. But yeah,
That's new.
Yeah. Yep.
Good. Well, we really do appreciate you taking time out of your day to visit with us. We look forward to when, like I said earlier, we can get out to California, or maybe you can come east and visit us here.
I'd love to.
We
I
can
would
see
love
each other.
to.
Yeah, it will be nice when we can travel again. So
Well, I
look
can.
forward to it.
You don't have to worry about me.
Well, good. That's good. Maybe we'll see you sooner than later.
Maybe.
So,
Great.
All right,
so thank
gentlemen.
you all. I'm just going to say a couple words to the audience before I cut this off. Just thank you all for joining us today. Please visit our website for future events that are coming up. We have an event page that outlines all of the interviews that we'll be doing in the next few weeks. And please join us if you can. And if for those of you who joined us today, if you have questions, maybe Clark will go on our Facebook page and he might be able to answer some of those questions for you, or Ken and I will do our best to answer your questions. So please type your questions in the comments, and we'll do our best at the end of the video to get answers for you. And lastly, we hope that everybody is staying safe out there, staying healthy, and we'll look forward to the day when we can all get open, we can all see each other again in person, and actually shake one another's hands again. It's a missed trait of the world right now. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you, Clark.
Thank you for watching our video today. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section below. If you would like to see more videos like this, click the subscribe button or visit our webpage to see a list of all upcoming events and watch previously recorded interviews and presentations. From all of us here at Hermit Woods, thank you for watching. Be well and stay safe.